we're doing sort of a panel discussion here. So for the three of you, I've got a few questions that I'm going to kind of rotate through, and perhaps you can answer them. If anyone else wants to chime in on the answer as well, if they have a different perspective or some additional information, I think that would be really valuable for people to discuss. So let's start with Victoria here. So 4III Innovations has become one of the leading global manufacturers of sports performance feedback products. How does the physical location of a product manufacturing company impact the ability to be internationally successful?
That's a loaded question. I think being a hardware manufacturer in the tech community is much different than being a software manufacturer or company. And location does make a big difference in your consideration. I think the two things that I really looked at were access and culture in setting up. Where do we set up our company? Do we have access to the talent that we need, to the resources, the engineering, the marketing, just the whole business talent? Do we have, how far are we to our customers? And for us, we're in Cochrane, so part of the Calgary community. We found that being in Cochrane, we were on the northwest side of the city, so easy access to the university, to resources there, good resource pool. And the oil and gas industry has brought in such high-powered, strong talent into our community. So we saw that is a good place. With our customers, we're half an hour to the airport. So having proximity to an airport to be able to get to your customers is super important. Having the physical resources to do the development for your product. With software, you just live in the digital world. You don't have to physically care whether it's cold outside and can you test your bike? Can you get on that bike? Or do we have the RF infrastructure that will support the protocols that we're trying to test and communicate in? It's just having those physical resources, having the space for the manufacturing, for testing, building out prototypes. And then the other thing is access to a network for investors. So those are, when I look at where we put in our company, it's the access. Would we have access to the fundamentals that we need? And then also access to manufacturing. And I think we're in a time right now where we are really reviewing and with robotics and everything, we're really rethinking where do we manufacture? Because it's even though the cost of labor and cost of manufacturing offshore can be very low, there's still an overhead cost to travel there and back and support these remote locations, especially when you can't get on a plane anymore. So, and just go to those places without some penalty for when you return for quarantining and those sort of things. So that's the access part. And then just briefly, the culture part of it. I think one of the things that we always keep in mind is people buy from people they like, people they know, and people they trust. And so being in a place where your customers are familiar with you and understand the culture of you is important. Again, bringing our global partners, our global customers out to Cochrane was always, in my mind, a feather in our cap. It always bode us very well because being a small town, number one, and Calgary, I mean, there's just a warmth and a welcoming of coming into a place with a Canadian atmosphere. So I think that is something we shouldn't underplay is who we are as Canadians. And from that, looking at what is the trust of that country? What are the culture of that country? Are their patents respected? Just what is their protocol for having agreements with each other? So that's another, I think, big piece of where am I going to set up my company? And lastly, but I think super important, is whenever you're setting up your company, wherever that is, any country, any city, is this a place that me and my family will thrive? Can I live here? Because at the base of it all, you have to be in a place that you're comfortable to be at to work. And so I think those are the considerations for location.
Excellent. Just in case Brydon or Scott want to chime in on that. Otherwise, we'll move on.
I'd like to.
Go for it.
So first part, Victoria, where are you from?
I'm from Alberta. I was born and raised in Alberta, but I went to Waterloo for my engineering, and then I came back to Alberta, I guess. So I like it here.
Businesses, I have a slightly different perspective. I started Attabotics here because my kid's here.
Yeah.
My life is here. Was it the best and easiest place to start a hardware company? No, not at all. Attabotics got really, really lucky with timing. The engineering talent exists in this province, but Attabotics started at a time when the oil and gas industry was doing massive layoffs. If we weren't doing massive layoffs, we would not have access to the talent we need to build, innovative hardware-based companies in this province. It's never would happen. And the manufacturing infrastructure, the prototyping infrastructure, when you build hard things, you need tooling equipment and shop time to do it. And we benefited from the unfortunate circumstances that the province saw. Had I tried to start Attabotics 2 years before, there's no way. For two reasons: we couldn't find the people, or we couldn't afford the people. Couldn't find the resources. Who wants to do a little prototype job for a startup when they can actually, do a big job for an oil and gas or an energy company? The other thing is the investors. To start a company locally, you need local investors. You don't go straight to the valley. No one answers your phone. Local investor interest would have been zero in a strong energy economy. So it was really, really fortunate timing to actually be able to start a hardware company here. But it speaks to kind of the ecosystem of what's required to actually build companies. It's people resources, of course. It's the investors. Entrepreneurs go where the money is. And it's also then about the rest of the infrastructure it takes. In a digital world, you need a laptop to build a company. In a hardware world, you need milling machines and plastic injection molding companies and companies that, make integrated circuit boards. You need testing facilities. It's a different ballgame. We were really lucky to have the timing existed to be able to do what we did here.
Great. Well, that sort of ties into one of the questions that I was going to ask you. As one of the fastest growing companies in Canada and with international success, why has Attabotics maintained Calgary as a home?
You just said it. It's our home.
Yeah.
That's it. It's our home. And Calgary, Calgary has a depth of talent in this city that has been looking for, additional purpose, additional opportunity. It would certainly be more challenging to keep people, and it is challenging to keep people right now because Calgary's tech community is doing exceptionally well. But it would have been really difficult to keep people had we seen oil prices skyrocket, for example. We have, when I talk about the lack of kind of an infrastructure for investors, for technology companies, especially hardware technology companies, there's an aversion to investing in things that you can actually touch and feel. And being able to find the support of not only our community and its people, but our country. Attabotics has benefited greatly from a bunch of the programs that were designed to develop technology and keep them here. I'm here because my kid's here, my family's here, my life's here. But to be able to build a business here and to make up for the kind of shortfalls of the investor ecosystem, we've benefited greatly from federal, provincial, and local programs that help keep us here. So I want to give credit where credit's due. And that is that they wanted to keep us here federally, provincially, and locally. And thankfully that helped offset the differentiation and valuation and access to capital that we don't have as a hardware company growing in Alberta.
Great. And so just one follow-up question. With regards to what you've been through and the fact that you had the good timing with the failure of the oil industry and such, what about today? Like if you were to start a company today, do you think Calgary's changed or Alberta in general? Do you think with the programs and stuff that are available now, Calgary would be a pretty decent place to start a hardware company?
I think there's great opportunity right now to make Calgary one of the best choices in the world for starting any business. We're seeing a mass exodus out of those traditional places right now. Going remote meant that you can now work anywhere. So it's about where do you choose to live? And we have the talent, we have the infrastructure, we still have a depressed energy economy. We have one of the best places in the world to live, period, or nothing. We have healthcare. We have a country full of people that give a shit about each other. And excuse my French on that one, but it is that serious. And if you're going to choose to live someplace, now you can choose any place. And if the provincial, federal, local government and the community can come together and find the mechanisms and the vehicles to actually generate the startup capital and support needed for a business, I don't see why we can't be the best place in the world to start a business.
Is that up? Yeah, let's do it.
Well, we all got to get on the same page. We all got to get on the same page to do it, but entrepreneurs go where the money is. And we have the added attraction of this. I don't see why Calgary can't be world leading. We just got to make sure we find all of our resources and pull them together into a structure that attracts them. That's all. Well
put. Thank you. Brydon, your company, CoolIT Systems, originally began from a box full of parts and a problem to solve back in 2001. Having grown into a successful international corporation, has being Calgary-based helped or hindered your growth?
Well, like Scott just mentioned there, the answer is both. In the early days for us, starting the company in 2001, it was founded, but we started earlier than that as three guys in the garage. And, there's all kinds of challenges that timing played into it. Like Scott said, back then the oil was doing quite well. It hadn't peaked like it did in like 2004 or in there, but it was doing quite well. So access to the talent pool was difficult. If you could get them to take a look and take a chance maybe on a startup, then there was the challenge of wages and all the benefits that you could get from the big oil companies and that side of the industries. And so that caused, well, it was just a challenge. We did have the benefit, though. I would say in general, there's more positive than negative, though, of starting here in Calgary. And one of the early ones that helped us was, I don't know who remembers this, but it's been a while since they've come and gone, but Voodoo PC was a very successful startup that was one of the world leaders in the boutique building PC gaming enthusiast market. And having them in our backyard here was a great way for us to get our feet into that market, get some exposure. Ravi and Roel were both very knowledgeable young entrepreneurs at the time, and I'll tease them a little bit maybe if they actually listen in, that we had some pretty fun times together, and now we're all getting a little older, so that's good on all of us, I guess. But they've both moved on doing exceptionally well. But that did help us get our feet into the market, get exposure, and other things like access to Silicon Valley from here, which is really important. That's actually pretty easy for us. You jump on a plane, it's a direct flight to San Francisco. You're in 4 hours you're in the valley. So being as remote as we are from that epicenter of technology that we dabble in, it really hasn't been a bother.
Okay.
And so yeah, it's been more positive than negative, that's for sure.
And then maybe as a related question, during your startup phase, what were some of the things that you were that were the most difficult for you to overcome?
Well, in the very early days, I would say one of the biggest things was balancing a day job, raising a young family, trying to stay alive while you start a venture that you really have no foresight on what it could become. I was probably the most reserved of the three original founders, and in the fact that I saw it maybe as a side business, a cottage industry sort of thing. We could make some money on the side, and luckily there was one of the other founders was a little more aggressive, I guess, in a way, and he sort of said, this is bigger than that. It could be we could make a run on an emerging industry that only has very few players in it, and and then some early successes tilted the scales in that way. So
thanks.
Okay. But that would be the big one, raising a family and doing all this.
Excellent. So Scott, there's some significant competitors in the inventory management and inventory storage space. How have you managed to work around that?
Well, first I say we're not working around it. Competition is really applicable if there is a constrained market. I'm pretty sure every single one listening right now has bought a lot more online than they did before COVID. Attabotics started because we saw a problem. We didn't start with the technology. We started in a garage in Okotoks, actually. Three of us in a garage in Okotoks, but we had an idea to solve a problem, and that problem is growing faster than anyone in the industry can really address it. So I'm not saying that we don't worry about competition. We are very, very focused on actually still working hard to solve the problem. In the supply chain industry, there's such nuances to it, and you've got to take in account the nuances of the culture of the retailer themselves, the expectation of their customer base, what in capital investments they've already made, what they plan to make. There's not one solution that solves for everything. We'll have that solution in about 3 years, but right now there's not one that solves for everything. So we're really, really focused on understanding the market, understanding the changing needs of both the retailers and the consumers, and working to evolve our product as quickly as possible to meet the demands. COVID accelerated kind of the customer uptake of digital platforms. They estimate between 5 and 7 years. And it happened in 3 months. So we're focused really on just getting our product out there to solve the problems that currently exist, versus trying to create a kind of competitive differentiation from the rest of the competition. That being said, we have a competitive difference from the rest of the competition, and I'm really, really grateful that ants don't have copyright lawyers, because I ripped them right off. And the rest evolved kind of human-centric technologies, and we didn't. So, but it's our focus is just getting out there to solve a problem, because there's a big one.
Excellent. Victoria, having been there, done that, what advice do you have for a new manufacturing company trying to reach a global market?
I think you have to open your mind up to be thinking globally about where your customers are, and global customers you need to be comfortable with talking to global companies and not underestimate the impact you can have for them. If you really feel that you have a fit, if your product is a fit for them and can give them an advantage, most of the time those companies are very stretched in their own resources and are interested in looking for better solutions. So number one is your attitude and your optimism to have the right to open up those doors and look for those people who can get you in. So there's always the fox that will bring you into the company, and you're going to make them a winner, and you can win as well. So there's a win-win there. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you find your way into that company, you better have something that is real and of interest, because you won't be able to open the door a second time if you don't have a well thought out solution and a plan that is worth their while to give you the time of day. So and there's a fine balance with that, because you can't overdevelop a hardware product, because 9 times out of 10, whatever you build, actually 99.9 times out of 100, they will not want exactly what you built. They will want to customize it for their needs, because we never really fully understand what their requirements are until you're actually in there and hearing their pain and seeing it from another point of view. And you can't, as much as you try to put yourself in their shoes, you can't. And so I think the magic for a hardware company is to take a concept to a point where it's very real, very provable and robust, and at a place that it can be then fine-tuned through software as well as through hardware, custom plastics and different inputs and outputs to it, so that you make it versatile enough so it can be molded to them, and you also make it rich enough that it can be adapted to different needs of different customers, because you want to build a platform for your base that then can be adapted into your different companies. Two other things that I think are super important is is building the partnership with your customers. And so with Four Eyes, we, our first company was downstream, and we had a lot of OE relationships. We knew that we were too small to build our own brand, create a product and get it out. I mean, these other two gentlemen are with companies who have been able to create their own brand and have stayed with that. But even with them, I would argue that they have had strategic partnerships with large companies that have helped them to scale and be successful. And that has been what we've done as well. At Four Eyes, we've Specialized was a cornerstone customer who gave credibility to our technology and made it real when we were in the Tour de France and that sort of thing with our products. So identifying the customers you want to approach and building strong relationships, because you will probably need to leverage their marketing and their reach to because you can't afford to do all the development as well as do all the market awareness and publicity for it. You have to have super deep pockets, and most hardware investments, like we heard here, it's hard to get enough investment to do that. And most of the initiatives in Alberta are more for the innovation and the development. Not so there's some support for marketing and promoting, but not as deep as it needs to be. So that's another challenge with that. And the other thing that you need to be able to do with your partnerships, if you're going to go global, you have to be able to really address strongly, how do you de-risk them working with you? Can you do you have a manufacturing avenue that you really can hit their volume targets, their timing, the quality? Can you scale to what they need? And I think those you need to have that plan so they can really believe you and trust you to put you into their plan, that you aren't going to leave them hanging at the end of the day with this one part that doesn't let them close the box and ship it.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you for that insight. Brydon, one of the most interesting aspects of CoolIT Systems history is your pivot from making liquid cooling products for the desktop gaming industry to your focus on cooling systems for data centers and server OEMs. How did you come to that decision, and how fast did it happen?
Well, I would say around 2010, we started to think about it, but what really drove us to commit to it and put resources into it was we thought anyway, we saw the ceiling for the desktop market coming with gaming consoles and stuff becoming more prevalent and getting more powerful. We made an anticipation that the gaming industry was going to pivot that direction. Desktops would be taken over by tablets and laptops and the like. That really didn't transpire like we expected. In fact, the desktop market is very large and still seemingly growing, and we're getting a good share of that, which is great. But around 2010, we started thinking about it. 2011 and 12 is when we really committed those resources and started to think about how we would tackle that industry, what the major challenges and hurdles would be. Started prototyping and development of certain things. When it really kind of started to solidify in our minds as a direction we wanted to go was, Intel had asked us to participate in a program where they wanted to put a supercompute cluster on a trade show floor, and that had never been done before. It will never be done again, because at that point in time, the power of a computer of that sort of scale, we're talking a couple IT racks, 80 kilowatt of power kind of thing, it was just possible to do on a trade show floor with the might and muscle of a company like Intel. So we sort of did that in 2013. That was a very pivotal moment for us. Obviously, partnering with them, it won some awards. It was one of the top 500 computers of that time for supercomputers in the world. And then it just sort of really pushed us in a direction of understanding which direction we were going to go, what the technology platform was going to look like, what nuances and things were going to be a challenge for us. But since 2013-14, those early days of some of those first offerings, it's grown exponentially since then, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. So while more competitors are coming on board, we still have a huge opportunity to capitalize, and we're extremely excited about what that means, and we're just digging in to try and turn the page on the next chapter here.
Brilliant. That's really cool. Moving on to Scott. The origin story for Attabotics is based on your fascination with ants, which is really, really interesting. To what extent has the development of your robot technology continued to follow that original inspiration?
If Leafcutter Ants specifically, actually. And I actually didn't have a fascination with ants, but when I saw the problem, I figured nature had already figured it out. So I just started looking at nature documentaries. And it was Leafcutter Ants that actually inspired me because of the way they live in 3 dimensions. But as an example, you give a very simple organism a simple rule, and complex behavior starts to evolve. Ants don't know how to build bridges. They have no idea how to build a bridge. But they do know if they're heading in this direction and they don't have anything to step on, there's just hang on to your buddy. That's what builds bridges. And that idea of giving a simple set of rules to a swarm, a hive of autonomous robots now starts evolving complex behaviors. And we're still discovering them. For example, in our route finding algorithm, we try to drive lowest cost of time, energy, closest bin, closest robot. That's simple rule. Which means now one of the biggest problems in a warehouse has typically been reslotting, moving product from subprime locations to prime locations to save steps. But that one rule, which was devised for energy and time, actually starts automatically shifting where contents in the solution are stored based off of demand. We don't reslot. That rule causes the system to rearrange itself over time. And we're still seeing these evolutions, but we're keeping up with that mandate of simple rules. And then tailoring some of the business rules around it to accentuate or decrease some of those results. The other thing we're moving on to, when I talk about where we'd like to be in 3 years is a comprehensive solution for supply chain, is that ants are one of the most successful species on the planet. If you were to put all the ants in the world on one side of a scale and all the human beings in the world on the other side of the scale, ants will outweigh us. Kind of unfathomable. And I certainly don't want to revolt because I don't want to fight off my body weight in ants. It would be a losing battle. But they distribute themselves through an ecosystem, and we barely know they're here because of how efficient they are. But it's that distribution in an ecosystem that was an inspiration for a distributed supply chain. And instead of centralized, which is the way we live, we all just cluster in one place, and then we create these cities all around. But in a supply chain, you can't cluster a supply chain in one place. So historically, like Memphis was the central point for the US. That's where we fly all of our packages into and then fly them all back home. That doesn't support customer behavior. It certainly doesn't support the cost of modern commerce, and it certainly doesn't support the environment. So how do we now distribute supply chain? And we are actually looking at how ants do it and trying to modeling after that, because without being very smart individually, they have figured out how to be one of those successful species on the planet. And like I said, I'm really grateful that they don't have a copyright lawyer. So
that's excellent.
Ants also don't suffer the cost of air freight when we get behind in our timescales and we have to fly things. We're learning that lesson very implicitly right now.
Being reactive instead of proactive is, I think, the biggest shift that we're talking about. If things are closer to where they need to be, we have more options. But you're right, it's now with customers wanting next day.
Yeah.
And sometimes next day means very expensive, parcel post costs.
Moving to Victoria, sort of a little whimsical question for you. Had you recently invented a cool gadget to go back in time, what would you do differently in creating, running, or growing your organization?
Well, when you and I first started talking this morning, it made me really think about maybe our name is something, if I was to go back, I might change, because Four Eyes has caused it's been really good and it's whimsical and fun in a sport industry. Don't take yourself too seriously. And Four Eyes, it came from our eyewear, because our first product was a heads-up audio-visual display that fit on glasses. And so we're a bunch of geeks. Our founder wore glasses all the time, got called Four Eyes as a kid, and said, hey, let's just call ourselves Four Eyes. So But and we needed a URL that was that you could just do it on 4eyes.com and we could get that URL. So that was really fundamental. So that might be one of them. But more seriously, I think there's two areas if I was to look back and look at where has our flow been and where could we make it better. Number one, the products that we learned from, we brought out a few different products that weren't as successful as we thought. We thought we had it hit with this heads-up audio-visual display. Google Glass was taking off, and we thought we had a really simple, good solution. That didn't work, and we ended up having to pivot and turn. And I don't think I wouldn't change those because there was great learning in that. And I think we evolved and developed our core tech very well, and it really solidified the team. The places that I would go back and touch up would be in our process and our manufacturing acumen within the team. I think with entrepreneurs, and I'm coming from my IBM background, so it was really difficult to bring in that process, that respect for process, and without it being seen as something that will encumber and stall the company. And so there needs to be a really fine balance between a respect for the processes so that you can bring out your products that you're taking out to public and have the quality and the confidence and be able to scale that responsibly. And then the other piece that I would look at is looking at more team building in the management level, making sure that the management team is really finishing each other's sentences and aligned in where they go so that they aren't changing agendas or that things aren't fighting each other. So because I think it gives a lot of clarity for the team and the company in general, but that only comes with education and with a really strong leadership team. So I think those are the two areas that if I was to go back again, I would try to streamline some of our processes and our communication for our employees.
Cool. For whatever weird reason, I love that question so much. I'm going to just send it over to Scott and Brydon. Why don't we start with Scott? If you could go back in time and change something that has gotten you to where you are today, what would that be?
That is a tough one. Rapid growth is a challenge to manage culture. Exactly, getting everyone on the same page, finishing each other's sentences is hugely important. The message gets diluted at every level. So if the message starts up high, a little unclear, it ends up being very different by the time it works its way through an organization. And the other one is kind of tough, is we were fortunate enough to sign a lot of business off of an idea, an unprecedented amount of business off of an idea. I don't think anyone needs 6 pilot systems. Supporting 6 systems simultaneously as we develop and harden the technology in a live customer environment is not the least stressful way to build a business. But then again, the validation of the idea and getting that kind of early commercial traction was hugely important to creating the company we are today. So it's kind of, I don't know how to answer that. And, but what I do know also is one of my biggest learnings through all of this is I started a company building robots because I jokingly say I really actually don't like people that much. The people you choose to start a company with, it's like the person you choose to partner with for your life. Like those decisions are huge. And making bad decisions around who you choose to partner with can affect you for a very, very long time. And so hindsight being 2020, there's maybe 1 or 2 decisions that I would have looked at differently than I looked at back then, knowing what I know now. That making sure that who you're getting married to, in essence, is someone that you want to be in for the long haul, and they want to be in with you for the long haul, and that's something I'd look at. That's something I'd look at, and advice for anyone wanting to start a business: take that decision very seriously, and evaluate it from a bunch of different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. That's a really, really good point. Thanks for that. Brydon, how about yourself? What would your time machine go back to fix?
I would say just having being a little more bold, maybe. Like if I look at us, the first 10 years of the business, I think where we may have flawed ourselves a little bit, and timing, like was mentioned earlier, it's all about timing. And if anything, we were too early. When we started this, there's only a few enthusiasts putting liquid in their computer from their fish tank and killing their fish and just crazy stuff like that. That's kind of where we took the ball and ran with it. But being a little more bold and probably raising more money earlier might have helped us, because we were and have been for much of the company's history, iterating at a very, maybe an organic pace, I put it that way, but not one that would, you wouldn't look at our trajectory and our growth and understand how hindered we were financially through most of it. Yeah, you'd probably be fairly surprised how much we achieved on not much money, at least compared to, some of our American friends and how they do business and start big companies, and you hear $100 million raises and $500 million raises, and it's like, wow. So that would probably be one. Be a little more bold coming out of the gate.
Excellent. One of the things, sorry, my computer's doing something weird at the moment. So one of the things that was mentioned earlier was with regards to patents. And with a company that's based on, software and stuff like that, it makes it a little bit less as important for patents. But when you're building products, patents, presumably, I'm not a patent guy, but presumably patents are a really, really big, important part of what you guys are doing. Does anyone want to take that one?
I can share kind of part of our philosophy.
Okay.
I know with my background, figuring out, trying to patent the mechanical system, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Spending a lot of time on some unique feature that you have, is one way, I guess. But we approached it as what is purely innovative. The foundation of our IP is actually geometry, not technology. And we wanted something that could be broad, easy to defend, very demonstrable in a court, because the value of our solution doesn't come from robots that climb around in 3 dimensions. It comes from the geometry and the movement, necessarily not the mechatronics. We have a lot of software patents. I think we're getting now, we're north of 40 approved patents, and I think we're on our way to 100. But the strategy with patents is about creating value as well. The bigger the moat you can create around your idea, the more or the less willing your competition is to try to kind of dip their toe into that moat, I think. And investors invest in you for a return in the future. And in our industry, it's actually kind of fascinating. Our main competitor is now suing another one of our competitors. And in the UK, that lawsuit means actually taking over their entire business. Mm-hmm. And in the US, it means absolutely stopping the sale and distribution of the product into the US market. And that's based around an IP position. IP is a fence around the hard work that you do. That's really what it is. And our approach was to find the broadest, tallest fence and not get into the specificities, because that's always easy to work around. Mm-hmm. So we've looked at it that way. The biggest blocks of difference are what we choose to file our IP on.
Okay. I'll jump in on that as well. We take our patents are a serious part of our business, and I agree with you. It can be debilitating to the company if you have to get into a lawsuit. We build our patents to protect ourselves so we can continue to do what we do, not so we can go after someone else if they're in our space. We really drive hard to get our product out there and to market and to be successful, so that if if in sometime down the future we find out that someone has infringed on us, well, guess what? We've got a lot of back pay to come to us. So it's not about being aggressive or litigious. And the other thing I think that companies shouldn't underestimate, as a small startup, you've got a little petri dish here of people who are innovating, who are thinking with new ideas, bright ideas. And in large companies, that tends to go away and get stifled into the company think. And so when you think, oh, that's a great idea, don't discount it and actually grab it and even just document it so that down the road, if you decide you want to save it, you can, and you can go back and flush it out, because you'll start to have a war chest of patents that, again, talk about making value. That's what those companies often want, are those 40, 50, 80, 100 patents that they can't seem to even think up or generate. When you've got that gives them a whole new lease on innovation and fresh air that they can't bring into their company themselves. And so it's expensive to do, but it is a valuable thing to do for your company for the future.
Cool. Yeah. Any comments, Brydon?
Yeah, well, I would add that, in a perfect world, I think if we had our choice, we have many patents and stuff, but if we had our choice, we would just compete in the market with, our offerings as a product and try and avoid the quagmire of litigation, and we have been in lawsuits, and it's there's no real winners ever. It's just the lawyers make a bunch of money and everybody seems to get distracted, and the amount of effort it takes to keep some of that momentum going with the distractions that it can cause it can sink a company really if you're not prepared for it. And we would just, in the perfect world, we'd rather just compete on merit and product, but that's not the world we live in. So we do have to protect ourselves, and we have, but to be definitely on the defense, not as an offensive weapon or tool. I don't think that's a good strategy long term.
And even then you'll have patent trolls pop in,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, that's another topic altogether.
It's been a defensive strategy. Also, hopefully, we think of it as possibly a deterrent to make people think twice about coming in to do something exactly like we're doing, because they know they're opening themselves up then. The one thing I want to add to that is Canada, has been incredibly supportive of developing and registering IP, and there's a lot of programs for young companies that can get the support of organizations like IRAP and whatnot to find some of the funding to get into, their first IP protections. The support we've received for that has been great. So I just want to add that piece. The kind of the next piece, and as a segue, and I'm hoping that, because I'd like to get the feedback from us at the panel, is that there's a cultural change in Canada that's different than the US, which is an exit of a Canadian company is considered a huge success if it's over $10 million. And there seems to be this nervousness to build, not to start companies in Canada, but build great ones. And I have yet to encounter any reason why great companies can't be built here, except for culturally, it seems to be this idea that once you reach a certain threshold, then it's time to give it up to somebody else. So Canada supports very well the starting of businesses. Culturally, I think there's some work we need to do on the idea that we're fully capable of building great businesses here.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a quick thing. Scott, I think part of it is, and maybe this is a lesson I've learned from our new CEO who's worked and lives in Los Angeles, and he kind of teases us once in a while. He goes, put on your you take off your Canadian kindness hat, put on your American let's get bold hat, and we laugh about it. But I think there's a bit of that where we're a little tentative to invest big, huge piles of money. We're a little tentative to bring in, expand the resources at scale like you need to do it in some cases. And I think that's just a Canadian thing. I don't know how to describe it further, but
we have a history of doing that in oil and gas, though. So
true.
Technology companies, though, that's where I think the shift is.
Right.
I think it goes to community. it goes to the community piece where Canadians in tech are more meek, not as bold, because there's not enough of us to be that force. And I think that as we have more and more successful tech exits, we have more and more people staying here and reinvesting into tech. And, one of the, when we had our first exit, we stayed here and we started Four Eyes. And the goal there, let's not quickly grow this company to flip it. Let's grow this company to be able to be the next RIM. Let's bring RIM to Alberta. And so we actually acquired a company from Waterloo area and brought it out to Alberta, and it's now part of our Four Eyes team. So if we as an ecosystem can start putting our heads together and consolidating and giving strength so we can be bold and building those, have that vision for let's build those bigger companies here. I think we're just at the beginning of that, and it's about community and us staying together. And you can't go it alone in this, that's for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
Well put. Well put. So we have about, looks like 10 minutes or so, a little less than 10 minutes left. I'm thinking maybe that we open it up for some questions. So if you want to ask a question, please type in the chat, say maybe your name or something, or I guess you don't need to do your name, but you can say, hey, I have a question. And then maybe we'll just facilitate that as carefully as we can for the next few minutes here. Does anyone have any questions for any of our panelists? Peter, unmute yourself and ask your question.
I unmuted myself and I put myself on video. How you doing, Scott?
Good, sir. How are you?
Good. So I'm going to give each of you one wish. We have a new provincial government that is stating that they're focused on diversification. What's the wish that you would like to convey to that provincial government? Why don't we start with Brydon, if you don't mind?
I would just say to them, please follow through, simply.
What do you want from the provincial government, Victoria?
To open their blinders and to recognize that tech is real in Alberta.
Scott?
I have a very long answer. Shorten it. It's been a bit political talking point for a very, very long time. When you're spending taxpayer money, there's always someone that's going to be upset about it. Look at the controversy over bridges and art on overpasses. Entrepreneurs go where the money is, and taking this money and evenly spreading it out in a thin layer across everything doesn't make an impact. It just makes a political statement. I would like to see the provincial government work with the federal government and local governments to create a focused fund to support seed and Series A companies, and promise, as Brydon said, to back it up and keep it going with a growth fund that supports innovation in the province. And if the tie to that is you build your business here. And I'd also like to see we start modeling these funds to solve the problems of architecture in the city. And I know it seems like a tangent, but you create a project and you open it up to world-class architects. Think about the Peace Bridge, think about the boat. And then if we attract those investors that have the acumen and experience in tech, they're looking for opportunities globally outside of the Valley and outside of Boston now because of what's happening. So can we bring in a lead investor with the experience and acumen technology, work with local investors and the capital that exists in this market, and the provincial government, federal government, local governments to de-risk this into a fund that's Alberta-centric? I think we have the best of both worlds. We won't suffer from low valuations. We will now get experience and acumen in tech. We will get a pool of money that's designed to build businesses and build companies. And we will attract people here. Yep. Calgary is a great place to live, but what we need is that focused support on building business here. And Asian a thin layer of money across a broad spectrum of opportunity will never do it.
It's a great answer. I think all three of you are pledged to building dominant large companies. And I think that the peanut butter approach from a provincial government that wants to satisfy everybody is not really a winner. I completely agree.
And a few wins in the private sector creates a flywheel effect, as Victor said. So how do we start spitting out our staff with their ideas to go build their next businesses? We need the wins, and which means we need the support until the ecosystem has the spinning flywheel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. We have Trevor here has a question. Did everyone on the panel start their career as an engineer, mechanical, electrical, something else?
Yep.
Yep. Maybe just really quickly say what you started at.
So I started out as an electrical engineer with a business minor with it, and from there I went to IBM, and I went through their marketing biz dev program. So I did get a good balance, and then from there I was at Novotel, where they had a really strong manufacturing process system. So I didn't go from school into building a company. I actually got experience in companies that were doing well, and then brought that into my own.
Brydon?
No, I am not an engineer. I think I barely passed grade 12 actually, but what I am is an extremely curious person. I just you know, and my background is actually came from some fabrication and just a tinkerer of all things, cars, bikes. I'm a musician, so I'm left brain thinker, I guess. But yeah, not a any kind of post education of any kind. Just super curious.
Great. And then Scott?
On paper, I'm the least qualified person to have my job. For sure on the planet. A Bachelor of Science in Nursing. A career spent actually in the trades, journeyman cabinet maker. I used to build skateboards, but like Brydon, curious. I used learning as a way to manage ADHD and anxiety, and so I've just been feeding my brain with curious ideas. And Attabotics wasn't a company I wanted to start. It's a company I wanted to find a good reason not to start because it scared the crap out of me. So researching, looking for reasons not to do this, but I wouldn't let one of them be fear. Put me in the position that now I'm, you know, my university education and my experience has absolutely no, you know, application to what I do now, but being curious and wanting to learn has kind of kept me hopefully adding value to my organization. So
great. The theme of the day is going to be curiosity, I think.